Well, good morning, everyone. This is Jim Manker, the Director of Business Development for the CSAC Finance Corporation, and we're really proud to celebrate our long-standing partnership with VANIR Construction Management, just an expert across the nation in construction management issues and concerns, and have been a tremendous partner of CSAC for over 20 years. And so we're excited to celebrate them today and also hear from their expertise. Got a great panel that you'll hear from in a minute. And we're also excited to celebrate our relationship with the Institute for Local Government and my friend and colleague, Randy K. Stevens from ILG, and you'll hear from her as she introduces the panel this morning. So again, thank you VANIR for your strong partnership of California counties and really counties across the nation. Thank you, Institute for Local Government, and your help in hosting today and also promoting this event with us. We're just glad that you're with us. And so I want to turn it over to Randy K. Stevens at this moment. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Jim. I truly appreciate that CSAC Finance Corporation brought together the Institute for Local Government and the team from VANIR Construction Management. This is a really great opportunity to share information about the FEMA Assistance Program, and thank you to the experts on the line for joining us today and sharing this information with our county and municipal government colleagues. I do want to acknowledge that I think we have colleagues from Inyo, Fresno, Solano, counties and others. I'll give shout outs to those counties as we see your folks arrive. And for now, just a brief description about today's webinar. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues, businesses and communities around the world are facing new and unique financial challenges. Many municipalities are being devastated financially due to unforeseen expenses related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Disaster funding is available, but reimbursement work can be delayed or not approved because of incomplete paperwork, missteps, or a lack of understanding of eligibility criteria. VANIR is ready to help counties and municipal governments successfully navigate the FEMA Public Assistance Program. This webinar includes guidance on tracking, calculating, and justifying emergency costs, supporting the local reimbursement reconciliation, avoiding the obligation of grant funding, and maximizing funding and minimizing risk while ensuring integrity of your assets and critical infrastructure. Today's agenda, we'll share a little bit about the CSAC, ILG, and VANIR, and then we'll have presentations by the experts at VANIR, and we'll have a time for questions and answers, and of course share some tools and resources. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions during the session, please use the question box located on your GoToWebinar software. Type in your question and we will share that with the panelists. At this time, we'll share questions with the panelists if it's related to a specific slide. We may hold your question until the full presentation is done, if that's preferred. A little bit about the Institute. We are the nonprofit training and education affiliate for the CSAC Counties Association, for the Cities Association, which is the League of California Cities, and for special districts through the Special Districts Association. We have resources in a number of program areas and welcome staff and elected officials to take advantage of our resources in leadership and governance, civics education and workforce, public engagement, and sustainable communities. We have a number of resources available to officials regarding COVID-19, leadership, and how to communicate with your public. And with that, I do want to also acknowledge that CSAC has an incredible website for supporting counties through the COVID pandemic, as well. The Cities and Special Districts Association have a resource as well available too. Now I'm going to go ahead and invite our colleagues on the line to share a little bit about themselves through a particular polling question. There'll be two polls, and I invite you all to go ahead and click on your screens. I'm going to first ask you, what best describes your agency or organization? So that poll is currently open, collecting responses. Looks like we have colleagues from county and private, corporate, nonprofit, or other on the line. All right, I will close that poll in just a second. If you're looking to respond, please go ahead and do so. All right, I'll close that poll. All right, looks like majority of our audience is from county government. Thank you so much for being here. And our audience also includes partners from nonprofits and private corporate agencies. Now I'm going to ask you about your role in local government. Are you a staff member, an elected official, a consultant, or some other type of role related to local government? Right. Please go ahead and make your final selection. Looks like we have a majority of staff on the line and representation by some of our elected officials, as well as some of our consultant partners. Thank you all for being here and for participating. We are looking forward to the questions and comments you have related to FEMA Public Assistance so that the experts here from VANIR can help you. I'll go ahead and close that poll. All right. Thank you. Back to our presentation. I'd like to thank our presenters for joining us today and giving us their valuable time. And I do want to introduce them briefly. I would like to thank, most of all, Bob Fletcher, Vice President of Business Development. He is the leader for VANIR's business development efforts nationwide. He is the colleague who brought us all together today. Thank you so much for bridging CSAC, the Institute, and VANIR together, Bob. I'd also like to introduce two of our speakers who will be diving in deep into the FEMA Public Assistance process, including Jim Smith, Vice President and Area Manager, and Lois Copeland, Grant Administration Project Manager. A bit of background, Jim is a program, project, and construction management professional with 28 years of experience in the construction industry. Jim is known for providing innovative project management, engineering, environmental, and design build services to both public and private sector clients across the country. His clients span education, healthcare, communications, municipal, water, wastewater, industrial, civil structure, transportation, aviation, manufacturing, and other agencies. And his responsibilities include leading teams across multiple states and supporting both city and county governments. Thank you, Jim, for being here and providing your expertise. Lois is a disaster recovery specialist with more than 15 years of extensive experience, including 4 years as working as a contractor for FEMA in both Louisiana and Texas. Her primary areas of expertise include public assistance, grants management, accounting, and audit support. She has a specific skill set to develop programmatic and financial reporting tools to efficiently and effectively track, manage, and project data. Lois and Jim are the experts on the line who will be answering a lot of questions related to FEMA Public Assistance, and they'll be diving in deep around our presentation. With that, I'd like to welcome Bob, if you want to say a few words.
Yes, I do. Good morning, CSAC family. Even though this is a virtual event, it is great to be with you all. As a charter member of the CSAC Corporate Associates Program, VANIR has been a proud partner with California counties for nearly 30 years. And, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has ravaged economies and brought us all together here today to discuss how we can successfully navigate the FEMA Public Assistance Program and maximize potential reimbursements. From here, I would like to hand it over to Jim Smith, and Jim is our area manager and vice president of VANIR with over 30 years of experience, and will lead us through the rest of the presentation. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Randy. As Randy mentioned, I'm area manager, vice president with VANIR. I get the pleasure of working with a lot of teams and working with a lot of cities and counties across the country. So excited to be here today and appreciate your time. I've got Lois, who's part of our team and really leads our grant management efforts around the country. She's a FEMA expert specifically and she's been involved with some of the largest natural disasters that have occurred in this country over the last couple of decades. She's at the forefront of COVID-19 and kind of jumped into it with feet first as soon as the pandemic hit and it was declared a natural disaster. It's exciting and pleasurable to work with Lois, an expert and somebody who's passionate and caring about what the challenges that face our clients and face the country. So appreciate everybody's time today. Next slide, please. Go ahead to the next. That's just a cover. So we'll get to the agenda. So cover for you while we're here. Lois is going to walk us through kind of an overview of the FEMA PA program, and then the specifics of how COVID-19 has impacted the country and how to navigate that relative to the FEMA process, what you can expect if you were to work with a PA assistant, an advisor, and then of course we'll field questions and answers at the end. So next slide. So, simply stated earlier, this has impacted and ravaged the entire country. Every day it seems to change a little bit more, and you guys are reeling with, the flow of information, how this impacts every citizen and person in the country. And what I guess the main message we're trying to let you know is that there's a tremendous amount of dollars out there earmarked and dedicated through FEMA to support and assist cities and counties across the country. And of course, it is far from and not too late to get involved with that. And we want to make sure today that we cover the basics for you and some of the specifics so that you can be successful in navigating that process and kind of know what some of the pain points might be. So next slide. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lois, our expert, and let her get into some of the details of, like I said, the overall FEMA program, how it works, and then the specifics of the COVID-19 emergency. Lois?
Thanks, Jim, and thanks everybody for your time today. I know they've called me a FEMA expert, but they use that term loosely. There's no such thing as a FEMA expert in my book. But for those of you who are familiar with FEMA, this will be a refresher. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Public Assistance Program, this will be a basic introduction. So we'll start off by the rules that governs the FEMA Public Assistance Program, and that's the Robert T. Stafford Act of 1988. It provides that FEMA, it gives FEMA the authority to provide disaster relief funding in times of natural disasters. It provides supplemental federal assistance, and that's a key word. FEMA is, public assistance is considered the funding of last resort. It pays out after you've gone through every other possible resource available, including insurance. But as we said at the beginning of the presentation, it's still very beneficial to counties, cities, and municipalities. The funds are there. The FEMA is very anxious. California OES is working very hard with them to get funds on the street. So next slide, please. So besides the Robert T. Stafford Act, a key legislation that governs how you track your FEMA funding are the 2 CFR, which gives you the uniform guidance for audit requirements, and the 44 CFR, which gives specific policies related to FEMA and public assistance. Next slide, please. Of course, you don't have to memorize all of that legislation. It'd be very hard to keep track of. So FEMA takes that information from the 2 CFR and the 44 CFR, and they condense it in their policy guide. And the latest one actually came out this month. It's dated June 1, and they updated it. It's on their website in their media tab. So if you need a new copy of it, and you're active with FEMA Public Assistance, then I would bookmark it. I know one of the significant changes on the new edition deals with congregate sheltering. So I haven't had a chance to read it myself yet, but it's fresh off the press. So it's a very helpful tool if you do receive public assistance, because every eligibility determination, every cost determination is rooted in the policy guide. So when you are a recipient of public assistance, it's important to understand the responsibility. FEMA is the awarding agency, and it has specific roles. It coordinates with the federal, state, and local agency. It establishes a joint field office. It collects project cost data, approves the grants, and obligates the funds. The recipient is usually the state or tribal government, and the recipient's role is to educate subrecipients on the program, to work with FEMA to manage the grant administration aspect of it, to collect project data, to disperse funds to the applicants or a subrecipient, and to monitor or manage the program. As a subrecipient is usually a county or a municipality, a school district. Your responsibility is, of course, to request public assistance. And for this event that we're currently in, we'll talk about it later on in the presentation, there's still time to put in a request for public assistance if you haven't. Your responsibility as a subrecipient is also to identify your damages, make sure that everything is documented properly, make sure that costs are reasonable, provide this information for support to your claim. We have an arrow there because that's usually where things get bottlenecked between the subrecipient and the applicant receiving their funds. Proper documentation, proper procurement, reasonable costs. And people like Jim and I, that's why we're here to help get you through that bottleneck. Maintain accurate documentation and make sure that the services, as a subrecipient or applicant, you have to make sure that the services that you're getting reimbursed for are completed, that your project is complete. Next slide, please. This is a basic overview of the 4 elements of the public assistance program. In order to receive public assistance funding, you have to be, of course, an eligible applicant with an eligible facility. You have to perform eligible work, and your costs have to be reasonable. All 4 categories have to be met in order to be eligible for public assistance. And who are eligible applicants? Well, they're all 50 states, U.S. territories, local governments, private nonprofits. You have a different set of eligibility requirements you have to go through, but based on whether or not you meet those, you can be an eligible applicant. And as I said earlier, tribal governments. Next slide, please. What's considered an eligible facility? Well, it can be anything in this category. It's not an all-inclusive list, but things like flood control, navigation, irrigation, your power plant, your schools, your sewage treatment system, streets, roads, highways, and of course, buildings and systems and structures. Those type of things fall into the category of eligible facilities. Next, we'll move on to work. FEMA categorizes work into these 7 categories. We're not going to get into permanent work. Categories C through G are permanent work, and they each can be a presentation on their own. What we're going to talk about later on in the presentation is category B, which is emergency protective measures, which is what COVID falls under. We're not going to talk about debris removal, but there are 2 categories of emergency work. The first being category A, debris removal, and the second being category B, emergency protective measures. And that will be our focus on the second section of this presentation. And then finally, we'll talk about making sure that your cost are eligible. And the basic rule about cost and eligibility are whether or not the cost was incurred during the performance of the work, whether or not you adequately documented it, whether or not the services were procured and are reasonable. So that's just a basic overview of the 4 basic elements of eligibility for public assistance. Cost share. The standard federal cost share for most disasters is usually 75% federal and 25% non-federal. It's very seldom that the cost share would be higher than 75%. But I did find 2 examples there in California where the cost share, the president actually increased the cost share from 75% to 90%, and they happened in 2018, and there were 2 wildfire events. It has to be very, very extraordinary. I think every state, including tribal governments, have written to the president requesting an increase in cost share. That has not happened, and I think the reason is because of the CARES Act funding. I think there's so much available funding to cities and municipalities and school districts right now that, and FEMA is the funding of last resort, that I think that Congress doesn't see a need right now to increase the cost share, and I think that's why that hasn't happened. As the event progresses, I think chances are slimmer and slimmer that will happen. So that's where we are now, 75% cost share. Also, important point to remember that is that donated resources, contributions of cash, third-party in-kind services, materials, labor, those donated resources can be used to reduce the non-federal 25% share. So keep in mind that you want to track those type of expenses as well for this event, because they can be used toward your 25% non-federal share. Next slide, please. Now we're going to get a little into the actual COVID emergency declaration. As I mentioned earlier, the cost share is 75%. The incident period actually starts January 20th and is ongoing. The declaration date was March 13th. That was important because usually you have, from the declaration date, you have 30 days from the declaration date to put in your request for public assistance. As of today, that deadline is still undetermined. FEMA really doesn't have a time frame in mind. They're still, we're still counties, cities, states, we're still all fighting COVID. So at this moment, if you haven't put in a request for public assistance, you still have time. And there's only one category of work, and that's category B that was declared, and we talked about it. It's emergency protective measures, and that is those activities that are undertaken to prevent or stop imminent threat to public health and safety, and also to protect property. If it doesn't fall into that category B work category, then it's probably not reimbursable, and FEMA will view it as a normal operating expense. And of course, lastly, the declaration is nationally. So, next, please. So because this is a national event, FEMA wasn't able to go through its normal processes that it uses when there is a disaster. They usually mobilize people and equipment and send them out, and you sit with them and you pull together your claims. Well, it just wasn't enough resources to do that. So what they did is they took their grants portal and they modified it. They called it a COVID-19 streamlined application process, and it's modified for the COVID event. The process starts with a virtual applicant meeting. I'm pretty sure that most of you have probably attended one. It walks you through the process. You can put in your RPA on the FEMA Grants Portal website, and then proceed to fill out your application. It asks you some basic company profile information, then it will ask you your claim information. You can upload your documents, and once you get all of that in, you sign off. FEMA reviews it, comes back, maybe asks you 1 or 2 questions, maybe you left out some documentation. That's why it's very important at the point when you're filling out your application. Your claim may not be complete. What our clients are finding out is that they're doing their claims in 30-day increments. As the event continues, you know, no one can see an end right now. They're still doing eligible activity. Their staff and employees are still performing eligible activities. So they don't want to wait to get reimbursed. So they're doing it in increments of 30 days. And that's not a bad thing. If you have the information available, go in and put it in the system. Also, if you have a large project and you really need some funding, FEMA will advance 50% of the projected or actual, you may have actual costs, of the cost for immediate needs funding. So that's a step in the process that you can check. If you have that information and if you need funding right away, you can actually put in an application for immediate needs funding. Like I said, it goes through the review process, you sign off, and then you receive the funding. So just a basic overview of how the streamlined process works.
Lois, this is Randy Kay. I just wanted you to know we got a question that I thought might be helpful to ask at this time, given the process that you just described.
Sure.
One of our county contacts asked is a local emergency declaration necessary to receive FEMA funding? For example, back in March, there was an emergency declaration due to the danger from COVID-19. Since then, COVID-19 has not directly caused problems, but we have an economic challenge due to the shelter in place. Without a local disaster declaration, are we eligible for FEMA funding?
Yes, yes. And you can actually apply for you if the county that you're located in has applied for FEMA funding, you can actually apply through them if you're not applying on your own. I would go in, I would make first, and one of the things that I neglected to say earlier, it's really good to make contacts with your FEMA Public Program Delivery Manager right off the bat. They can actually help you through some of the eligibility. If you're like, this is a great question. They can help you decipher how the process will work. So if you don't apply through your county, I would go in and fill out the RPA as the local entity. I would go into the FEMA Grants Portal, fill out the RPA as the local entity, and I guarantee you someone will respond right away if you can or cannot do it. You will get a contact from FEMA with specific guidelines on how you should proceed. I don't want to give any wrong answers, but that's what I would recommend.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Not for now. Thank you.
All right. So one of the things to remember about the COVID-19 event is that all of the activities that are undertaken may not be eligible. And that's why I said it's good to have an advisor. It's good to have that contact with someone from FEMA. We always, whenever we go in to help our clients, we always make sure even if they've already started the process, well, who's your contact? And we make sure that we develop that relationship, because it helps with the rocky road sometimes, knowing who we can pick up the phone and ask additional information from. So all activities may not be eligible through the process. So you want to make sure that it fits into the category of category B. If you have any questions about it, then you should either reach out to your FEMA advisor or someone at Cal OES to be happy to answer your questions, or even someone at VANIR like myself if you're concerned about whether or not an item is eligible. And because there are so many funding streams out there right now from CARES Act, you want to make sure that you don't duplicate benefits. You don't want to use funding from other sources to pay for something that might be FEMA eligible that you're going to get paid for as well. You don't want to have to return funds in the end. So make sure that you have the proper tracking tools, and you're working with your accounting departments to make sure that things aren't duplicated, because FEMA will require that you pay them back any duplications. Next slide, please. So some of the categories, in previous presentations, we've had to shorten it a little because it didn't apply to some of the clients we were talking to. But for cities and counties and municipalities, management costs of running EOCs and training associated with that, disinfecting of public buildings, those type of activities, technical assistance that you may provide to local governments and emergency management activities, those type of items are definitely category B type emergency protective measures. Others include, next slide, emergency medical care. The latest policy that came out from FEMA on Friday actually talked about non-congregate sheltering. They've expanded their instructions or they've expanded the policy to be a little more descriptive regarding legal responsibility, work eligibility, cost eligibility, and again, duplication of benefits. So those non-congregate sheltering, medical facility services and supplies, temporary medical facilities, any type of activities that you may have undertaken in your community that fall into these sample categories would be eligible expenses under the COVID-19. I just talked about non-congregate sheltering and medical sheltering. This just emphasizes what I just said. And like I said, FEMA's latest policy came out last Friday, just elaborating on the non-congregate sheltering. I think there are some issues with legal responsibility in some of the cities and counties. So I think that's why they had to come out and elaborate on the policy a little. Other emergency protective measures include sheltering pets, distribution of food, water, and ice, movement of supplies and people, security. One important thing to mention about category B, under category B for labor, only overtime is reimbursable. So if you have security staff and law enforcement or first responders out there, the overtime that they incur performing the emergency protective measure is the only labor cost that would be eligible under category B, unless it's temporary labor, right? But force account labor, only overtime is eligible. And as you're going through these activities, you want to make sure that the people in your accounting department, want to make sure that your accounting staff is segregating expenses that are related to COVID, so that when you do have time to formulate your claim, that these costs are easily able to be taken from your accounting system. You don't have to go searching for documents. So make sure that your coding is COVID related, so that these expenses can be pulled easily. You want to make sure that you have the applicable certifications and permits at hand. You have procurement documentation for COVID-19. This was an exigent circumstance. I'm sure there was a lot of sole sourcing going on. If you did that, you will have to provide cost reasonableness in order to justify the sole source procurement. So make sure that you have any documentation associated on how you went about procuring that sole source available for your claim. Proof of payments,
insurance, that type of information ready for your claim compilation. Talked about overtime being the only eligible force account labor costs for category B. You want to make sure that you, in order to show overtime, you actually have to show what the regular time was. So you want to make sure that your force account labor documents are complete. You want to make sure that usually if you're claiming overtime, FEMA will come back and ask what was the overtime done in performance of. So it's good to have activity logs. And I know a lot of people like using the ICS 214 form. So that's a great form to use to supplement your timesheets and your payroll records. You want to have your fringe benefits breakdown ready. Any type of policies, human resources policies regarding emergency work of your staff, all of that will be a part of your claim and uploaded into the system for review. For materials, you want to make sure that you have the proper invoices, receipts, purchase orders. You want to have evidence of procurement. Again, exigent circumstances. If you have sole sourcing, you want to make sure that the costs are justifiable, because they will come back or they will kick the cost out for additional information as to why you went about and whether or not your costs are reasonable. Same thing for rented equipment and other contract works, same type. Procurement information, invoices, receipts, canceled checks, as complete as possible. When you're uploading your information into the grants portal, you want to make sure that your packages are as complete as possible, because that's going to get you through the review process much faster than FEMA having to come back and ask for information. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Lois. Good job. Next slide, please. So what can you expect, or what goes on as far as support relative to navigating FEMA? It's really broken down, or in my head's kind of two things: the management or the administrative functions, and then some of the more technical aspects of the services that you might need support on. Obviously, having an advocate working on your behalf to interface with the state and FEMA directly. All of the myriad of information that you're gathering, reporting on, wanting to be in compliance with. Quite often, as you go through the process, your initial documentation or submission may come up rejected, denied, and there's an appeal process. Actually, two appeal process if it takes that long. And so having someone to support that effort, and then navigating policies, procedures, kind of verification of eligibility. One of the things I know Lois is proud of is her success and track record relative to managing over 2,500 different applications and seeing those all through to completion without denial. So great track record. Technical support services, as I said, client representation. So a lot of this is in line with program, project, construction management type services. Lois mentioned cost reasonableness, which essentially is estimating, right? We want to validate, verify, and support when you have to do something from an emergency standpoint that it still will meet the industry standard relative to the cost associated with the effort. Developing the scopes that might go into a packet or work, and then all of the supporting documentation to go along with that. So, next slide. So, of course, FEMA recognizes and understands that there is an element of management that goes into dealing with a disaster. And so they typically assume 7% cost at the state level or recipient level to deal with the administrative management side of the effort. And then down at the local applicant, city, county, individual, there is an understanding that there'll be a 5% towards the management as well. These are internal or external costs. This is if you choose to do it internally, these are still costs that would be that would impact you, the subrecipient. It's important to note, however, that FEMA looks at cost differently when it comes to the management of these disasters and the worksheets and everything you have to do. There's direct, indirect, and then other and administrative relative to how those are viewed by FEMA. So if you go to the next slide, you know, for VANIR, we're very detailed in how we set up and track all of those costs. Ultimately, FEMA will not reimburse, allow for what is deemed indirect, and will only reimburse or capture relative to your worksheet, your cost, those direct costs. And so it's important that when you're setting up your management structure that you capture costs accordingly. This is one that we use. It's not hard and fast, it's just our approach. And, you know, just important to note that certain functions, certain meetings may not be deemed a direct. Maybe you're having an overall meeting to kind of talk about the disaster. That is not, you know, a direct cost associated with a particular project, like Lois talked about, so it'd end up being indirect. So how you approach it, how your management team approaches it, how your advocate approaches it is very important when you're calculating all the costs associated with the management of the pandemic and the response. So, thank you. And with that, we'll turn it over to Q&A.
Hi, thank you so much to Lois and Jim Smith and to Bob Fletcher for speaking on behalf of VANIR and sharing expertise about FEMA and Public Assistance Program. Inviting all of our participants to share any kind of questions that you have and your experience or reflections in working through the FEMA process so that our experts can help you here. I believe we've answered all the questions that have come in through the written portion. I will share with VANIR the contact in the county where they're from regarding the question that came through earlier to see if a bridge can be made possible to a FEMA or OES contact. And I just want to invite our colleagues from VANIR to share any other reflections that they think are helpful to local government officials in this process. All right. I'm not seeing a lot of questions come through at this point. I will keep looking for those questions coming through on the Q&A box. So please go ahead and write them in. And for right now, I'm going to continue on with a little bit more of the slide deck to see if we have any questions come in the interim. Again, I want to encourage participants to take a look at vanir.com/FEMA for more information. And VANIR provided a lot of great contact information for how to connect with them and reach them. And on this particular slide deck, I do have the email addresses for our VANIR contacts. And I encourage you to join ILG for updates on best practices in local government as well. And I want to let attendees know that we will also be sharing the slide deck as a PDF, as a handout. I'll go ahead and add that in just a moment. And all of the attendees will have the opportunity to receive the recording and information about this presentation in just a day or so. We'll send all of that information to you. Looks like we have a question coming through. The question asks, is there one application for one entity or separate applications for one entity? And Lois, is that a question that you could help answer?
Sure. If I understand the question, if you fill out an RPA, if you're a local municipality, a city, or county government, then the RPA will be for that particular entity. So there will be the main application will be can be amended. So what I said earlier, and I hope I wasn't confusing. Once let's say you have a cost for your estimated cost came out to $100,000 as of May 31st, but you're continuing activities. That same application will be amended when you go back into the system and put in your June activity that's also eligible. They're not going to start a whole new application. They will just amend the application that you already have in the system.
And I think that's what the question meant. If not, please correct me, but I think that's what you meant to ask.
Thank you. I do appreciate that response. There's a follow-up portion. I think, or comment rather, this is a county official who's just not sure if another department has already submitted. So is there any advice you could offer on kind of who's the main lead for doing the submission and who should be, how can county, departments internally work together to make sure that there's clarification and accuracy in this process?
Yes. The best advice would be like within the county to have a one contact person, and I know that that doesn't happen. What I would recommend, reaching out. It's probably easier to get the answer from California OES than it is to get it from FEMA. So I would reach out. I would go to the California. They actually have a direct, and I'll provide that information to you. I don't have it at hand, but you can actually ask about the setup. It is confusing because in the back of my mind, I want to say that you can, different departments can be eligible applicants, but I want to verify that for the state of California first. So I would try to reach out to California OES, tell them who already has the application, and they will be able to give you information as to whether or not you can put in a separate request for public assistance. Like I said, off the bat, I want to say you can, but sometimes states do things differently.
I would think, this is Bob Fletcher, I would think you'd really want to coordinate that with your county executive as well anyway, but they should have a handle on what's being done in those specific areas.
Thank you so much. I think there's also a question in here, if you're a city within a county, you have a great working relationship with your county, should you be doing something jointly, or should each of those entities go ahead and apply with separate applications?
I would say it's just a matter of preference. You can do it either way. The county and the city are both eligible applicants. If you have that close working relationship, it may be easier just to let the county do it. It's just a matter of preference that I've learned over the years. It depends. It just depends on what that relationship is. Sometimes it's not so amicable, so you want to do it separate. But if it is, it actually streamlines things a little.
Great information. I do think, people are either typing in questions or I haven't received them yet, but this has been very helpful dialogue about kind of this FEMA assistance program. I do want to thank and recognize county participants. I can see at least 4 different counties here with multiple staff members or elected officials online. Want to recognize Inyo, Fresno, Solano, and Alpine County for joining us today and for connecting with the experts at VANIR, and invite any last questions to come through. And while we're waiting for any of those last questions, I'm going to invite participants to share one more time through a poll. Since we have you online, I'd like to know what might interest you next in some type of webinar education to help you and your agency. Oh, there was a request, coming through asking if we can take a poll of who still needs to apply for program assistance. I will see if I can work on a poll on the back end right now through the system. I'd also just invite all of the participants who are on the line right now, if you still need to apply and you need help with this, can you write a comment and we can pass that information along to the team at CSAC as well as to the team at VANIR. Let us know if you're interested in receiving some more direct assistance in applying for PA. And with that, I'm going to conduct our last audience poll about what kind of assistance you need for COVID-related training. So there's 3 different options. Do you want some more support with webinars with industry experts like we've had today? Are you looking for written materials that will help your council or your board? does your specific agency need direct training and direct capacity building to support your agency? And please go ahead and click in a response. Looks like we are currently seeing the need for more direct training and capacity building, and figures are recalibrating. I will go ahead and close that poll and share those results with everybody. 30% of you said you'd like to see more webinars with industry experts. 20% of you said you're looking for more written materials to share with your elected and staff members. And 50% of you are looking for training and capacity building support. Right. And again, if you are looking for help with the FEMA program assistance, please go ahead and type that in. I will receive those comments and can share them with the CSAC and VANIR teams. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We will share the recorded presentation and the materials with you, and you'll receive a message following this webinar. And I'd like to invite our colleagues from VANIR and CSAC, if you have any final words or reflections about the FEMA process or anything else you'd like to share today.
Randy, thank you for everything you've done. I think my only comment is, again, VANIR and counties go way back, and we're proud to support you in any way we can.
Yep, this is Jim Manker again with CSAC Finance Corporation, again celebrating our long relationship with VANIR Construction Management and their expertise across a number of fields, but in particular construction management. Thank you, Lois and Jim, for your expertise and sharing today, for Bob as well and your friendship, and then for Randy Kay and ILG working with CSAC. Really appreciate it. And again, this will be made available to you in the next few days. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great and safe day.
Thank you.
Thank you to all
Thank
of
you,
our
everyone.
participants. I truly appreciate everyone joining and asking great questions, and thank you to CSAC and VANIR for joining and making this a great learning experience for all. Thank you for joining the webinar on behalf of the Institute. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Randy.